Good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle Mahaney. I am a community living and employment specialist at the University of Minnesota's Institute on Community Integration. Thank you for joining us for the first in a series of 3 webinars on workforce development. This series is being hosted by the Minnesota Transformation Initiative, or MTI. MTI is a project funded by the Minnesota Department of Human Services to support the transition of people with disabilities receiving some minimum wage into competitive integrated employment through individualized technical assistance to provider agencies, statewide training opportunities, and peer mentoring and education for self-advocates and families. MTI is part of a statewide effort to support more people with disabilities to find competitive jobs in their communities. A tremendous barrier to transforming services for many of the provider agencies that we're working with as part of MTI across the state is finding and retaining staff. So that's why we're putting together this webinar series. We know that 3 webinars on workforce development are not going to solve the systemic and demographic forces that have created the workforce crisis, but we're hopeful that it will provide you with a few new strategies and tools moving forward. So I'm going to introduce our wonderful presenter. Megan Sanders is a national workforce consultant at the University of Minnesota's Institute on Community Integration. She provides training, consultation, and technical assistance for provider organizations, states, and individuals to address workforce challenges for direct support professionals, or DSPs, and frontline supervisors, or FLSs. Before joining the ICI staff in 2020, Sanders worked as a DSP and FLS. She earned a master's degree in social work and master's degree in public policy from the University of Minnesota and a bachelor's degree from Truman State University. Thank you so much, Megan, for helping us out with this series, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Danielle, and I'm happy to be here. I'm happy you all are here. Before we get started, I just want to do some Zoom intro really quick to make sure that everybody knows Zoom in case you are not familiar with it and live in the life of Teams, or maybe you're still in person, which lucky you. So Danielle just turned on closed captioning. If you look at the toolbar that's usually at the bottom or the top of your screen, it should look like what you're seeing right now, the screenshot that you see as part of this slide. You can turn on the captions with the left button that's show captions. There is also, if you're not able to hear me right now, there is also a button for change your audio, so you can go in there and mess around with your audio a little bit if you're not able to hear me. If throughout this session you have any problems hearing me or seeing my screen or anything like that, please post in the chat and we'll do our best to troubleshoot that so that you can get the best experience out of today. We are recording, so if you have a question at any time but would like to remain anonymous, please let us know that you would like to remain anonymous. But you can submit your questions using the Q&A panel. We'll answer most of those questions at the end of the session. I'll make sure to leave a bit of time. We do have a lot to get through, but I'll make sure to leave a bit of time for questions. Along with the raise hand feature at the end when we open up for questions, you can use that to ask any questions that you have or anything like that. The chat panel is open to you. So if you open the chat, you should be able to type in the chat and choose who you send it to. So you can choose it to send it to either the hosts and panelists, which are myself and Danielle, or you can choose to send it to everyone. You'll see there are some chats already popping up right now. So I'll be asking questions throughout the session, and I appreciate your participation as I'm asking questions to find out who's here and what kind of information you're looking for, so I can make sure to tailor what I'm talking about to the folks in the room. So just a brief overview first before we get started of the Institute on Community Integration. Danielle already explained that this is sponsored by MTI, the Minnesota Transformation Initiative. Danielle and I both work at the Institute on Community Integration, and our focus is to make sure that people with disabilities are valued by and contribute to their communities of choice. So that's done through a lot of different ways, and MTI is one of them. The other way that we do it is through direct support workforce solutions. At ICI, we have over 30 years of training and consultation around the direct support workforce. And just about a year ago, we opened the Direct Support Workforce Solutions, which is a part of the Institute on Community Integrations where we work with organizations and states to really use our experience and our research that we've done to help reduce turnover and attract, recruit, and retain quality talent. So today, as you all know, we are going to focus on gathering an understanding of the importance of data and then how to use it in your organization or within your workforce to understand and support the workforce that you hire. And then we'll talk a little bit at the end about planning for organizational change. And as Danielle said, this is one of 3 webinars. So the next 2 will build off of this. So all of the data and everything that we talk about today will apply directly to those 2nd and 3rd webinar. Before we get started, I want to know a little bit about all of you. So in just a second, we're going to launch a poll. And when the poll pops up on your screen, you can select all that apply. I want to know your role within the direct support workforce. So maybe you yourself provide direct support for a person with disabilities. Maybe you're a supervisor or a leader in a provider organization. Maybe you work for a governmental organization, or you work on policy to improve the workforce or the lives of people with disabilities. Maybe you're a family member of a person who receives supports, or maybe you're a person who receives supports and who is trying to find and keep DSPs. So Danielle, you can go ahead and launch that poll now. And if your role in direct support is not listed here, you can click other and then type in the chat what your role is. We'll give it about 20 more seconds. Thanks to those of you who are posting in the chat. We've got some HR folks. I did forget to include you as part of the roles. Apologies for that. Yeah, most HR. TA consultant. All right, we can go ahead and close that poll, Danielle, and share those results. So most of you are supervisors or leaders in a provider organization. Great, you're in the right place. A few of you are indicated other, about 15% of you. So we appreciate that you put that in the chat. Some of you work for a governmental organization or on policy or are family members. Unfortunately, we have no people who receive supports on the call today, but we do have some direct support professionals, which makes me personally really happy, because when I was a direct support professional, I didn't know that there were like webinars and there was work around workforce happening outside of my organization. So I'm really glad you're here, and I'm really glad that you're here. We can stop sharing those results. Thanks, Danielle. Okay, so just so we put everybody on the same level of who the direct support workforce is, just want to talk about who direct support professionals are. So direct support professionals, direct support workforce, DSPs, I'll be using those words interchangeably today. But DSPs are folks who provide support to people. So we don't have one job title. Nationally, DSPs is something that most people know what they are, but when I was a direct support professional, I didn't know that I was actually a direct support professional. I was called a living skills instructor. But there are a lot of other things that DSPs are called, such as personal care attendants or PCAs, direct care workers, direct support staff, community living specialist, job coach, employment specialist. Are there other names that you call your DSPs at your organizations? You can put them in the chat if there are others. SSC. Nicole, do you know what that stands for? Career coach, direct support professionals, support service coordinator. Thank you. Human service technician. Yeah, I've heard that one quite a few times too. Yeah. So a lot of different names for essentially the same work. Life skills instructor, a lot of different names, but we do know that the job is really complex. A lot of times we see it called an entry-level job. It's not. It's a hard job, and it takes a lot of skills and a lot of training in order to provide quality support to the people that we want to support, right? So we really want to make sure that from hire to retention, we're considering that this is actually a job that takes a lot of skill and a lot of skill development. In any day, a DSP might need to be a teacher to teach a certain skill to a person that they're supporting. They might need to be a nurse to give meds. They might need to play the role of a psychologist or the role of a personal trainer or a dietitian or a counselor or a physical therapist or an occupational therapist. And the list goes on and on and on, right? DSPs have to have a lot of skills in order to support people, to be able to live in the community and to be able to have the life that they want. So when we're thinking about this, from the way that we recruit DSPs to the way that we hire DSPs and select them, to the way that we train and orient DSPs, to the way that we appreciate and recognize and incentivize DSPs as they are moving along in their career, this is a really important thing to think about, is that this is not an entry-level job and it takes a lot of skill. In addition, in all of our research at ICI and at other institutions across the country, we know that without DSPs, there are no long-term services and supports, right? And we're seeing that as we're seeing the shortages across the country. People are no longer able to be in the community as much because of DSP shortages. There are organizations that are having to shut down because they don't have the DSPs that they need to provide supports. We know the essential role that DSPs play in long-term services and supports in providing that quality care and that quality support. We also know that according to PHI, which is a national research center that I'll talk about a little bit later, that there will be 7.9 million direct care job openings between 2020 and 2030. And this started in 2020, so we're in the midst of these huge job openings right now, right? And we also know that these job openings will come not only from job growth, so there being more positions open and more support needing to be provided, but also due to job separation, so DSPs leaving the field and leaving the job. And 2030 is a long way away, and there's a lot of things that we can do to have less of that job separation, right? And to start implementing workforce strategies that can help keep folks in the position and can recognize them for all of the work that they do. At ICI, like I said, we do a ton of research around workforce. And over the last 2 years during the pandemic, we did a nationwide survey of DSPs, and we reached out to DSPs across the country to answer a bunch of questions online about their experience as a DSP and some as a frontline supervisor during COVID. And we did this 4 times. We did it at like the start of the pandemic, so around April or May. And then we did it 6 months later, a year later, and then just at the end of last year, we released our report for the 2-year update. So one of the questions that we asked in this survey is we asked DSPs to tell us, it was an open-ended question, what are 1 or 2 major ways that staff turnover and vacancies at your employer have affected you and your coworkers? And seeing who's here today, I'm sure you all have heard this or have seen this personally, but just some of the areas that they said that they'd experienced impact from staff turnover and vacancies are they experienced pressure to cover shifts, they experienced increased hours and overtime, and their responsibilities changed. They had a higher workload, and then that workload that was higher had a disparity with the pay that they were receiving. They experienced stress and burnout and lack of supervision, support, and training. And on top of that, the new staff that are coming in, they felt were unqualified and not able to do the job that was expected of them. And then long-term staff were leaving. And that's a pretty big deal because we have a lot of DSPs in the field who have been in the field for a really long time and who love what they're doing, who are very passionate about their work and who are excellent at providing support, who are now leaving because of these high amounts of turnover and the many other things that were only amplified by the pandemic. So I'm sure you guys have seen this through your work, but do know that if you want to hear exactly what the DSP said in the survey, our report is online on the ICI website. So you are able to see those exact responses that people had to these questions. In addition, we asked DSPs in that survey about their health and well-being during the as a result of the pandemic, and we asked them to report on their mental health and physical health symptoms. And over half of the DSPs who we surveyed responded that they were experiencing physical or emotional burnout, and over half said they were experiencing symptoms of anxiety. Almost half said they were experiencing symptoms of sleep difficulties or depression, and a lot were also experiencing physical health complications, PTSD, other mental health issues, suicidal ideation, or some other physical or mental health impact. And we know that the pandemic has been hard on everyone, right? And it has only been amplified in the world of direct support. Direct support professionals have dealt with a lot during the 2 years of the pandemic and have to continue with their job and are still working it today and are still experiencing these symptoms. This report was just released at the end of last year, and the survey was out in the summer of last year. So they're still experiencing these symptoms even as we're, I don't want to say out of the pandemic, but we're returning to more of a normal life. They're still experiencing a lot of these symptoms. And we've asked them how it impacts their job. Over 3/4 say that it has impacted their job at least a little, so some or a lot of their job. So these symptoms are directly impacting the work that they're doing. We also know that turnover continues to be a problem. This data is from 2020, the National Core Indicators Staff Stability Survey. And again, we'll talk more about turnover numbers later and how to use turnover and calculate turnover in your organization. But this gives a good idea of the state of the workforce right now. We have almost half of DSPs turning over in a year. And that's a lot of DSPs leaving the field. And that doesn't even account for that range, right? So this is a nationwide staff stability survey. So in some states, the turnover is much lower, and in some states and organizations, the turnover is much higher, but the range was from 27 to 80%. And some organizations are even experiencing higher than 80% turnover. I'm sure some of you know your numbers now and can directly report out what those are. If you'd like to share them in the chat, you can, but I would never require you to share those because those are numbers specific to your organization. But we do know that turnover is high. And we also know that there are over 1/4 of those people that are leaving have only been employed for less than 6 months. And we'll talk about the implications of that a little bit later. But we also know that almost 1/4 of those who are leaving the field have been employed for 24 months or longer. So again, those long-term staff who have been working for so long in the field and just can't keep working in the field and need to get out. And we need to figure out how to retain them and how to provide the support that those direct support professionals need. So overall, we know that workforce is a national problem. We know that the combination of low wages and unaffordable benefits, combined with limited training and development for DSPs and lack of career advancement opportunities for DSPs, results in challenges in recruiting and retaining high quality employees. So we know all 4 of those factors are a really big deal in keeping employees. And obviously, we also know that results in poor outcomes for people who are receiving support. So we really want to work on this issue and we really want to improve. And we know that, like Danielle said, the things that I talk about today aren't going to solve everything. We know that there are a lot of problems that are systemic and on a larger level than just organizational level. But we do want to give you some ideas to make a slow change in your organization to begin to start to impact those numbers. So in talking about that, one of the first things we need to do is start thinking about decision-making as database decision-making. Before we talk about that, I want to know what kind of workforce data that you collect at your organization. So We'll launch a poll in just a minute, but there's a lot of different kinds of data you can collect, and we'll talk more about that later. But there are the numbers, so those retention numbers, those vacancy trends, vacancy rates and things like that, attitudes or opinions on the workforce that you've hired, so staff satisfaction surveys, things like that, performance or training standards, so if the DSPs have the skills and knowledge that they need to be able to do their job, costs and benefits. So if the strategies that you're currently implementing are worth the benefits. And then it's okay if you don't know if you collect workforce data or if you don't currently collect workforce data, you're in the right place. So Danielle, you can go ahead and launch that poll. And again, it's a select all. So select all that apply to you and then submit it. And if you don't know or you don't collect, again, that's all right. These are anonymous, so we're not keeping track of what you say. We've got about 70% of you participating, so we'll give it 10 more seconds. And I'm seeing in the chat, retirements have a big impact. Some don't want to quit, but also want to move on to the next phase of their life. Yeah, a lot of those people who have been working in workforce for a lot of years, I think the average age of, off the top of my head, I think the average age of a DSP nationwide is like 46. So there are quite a few who are reaching retirement age and who are ready to move on and retire, which is an excellent point. Danielle, you can go ahead and end the poll and share it out. So over half of you already collect retention and vacancy trends. That's great. And almost half of you collect attitudes or opinions on the workforce, performance or training standards, and costs and benefits. That's amazing. And then for those who do not, the 7% who do not collect workforce data currently, and the 18% who don't know, you're in the right place. We're going to talk about the different kinds of things, different kinds of data you can collect and how that can connect to the kind of workforce strategies you use. So everyone who's here, who's answered these questions, this is great to know. Thank you for your participation. We can stop sharing. Thanks, Danielle. So the importance of data. In order to choose any kind of retention strategy, your intervention should be based on data. You really want to choose the thing that's going to give you the most bang for your buck, the thing that's going to impact your numbers the most, the thing that's going to impact your workforce the most. So those interventions should really be based on quantitative and qualitative data. So quantitative being those numbers and qualitative being those more of like surveys and things like that. Both of those are really important to figure out how to proceed with your workforce. In addition to that, knowing information about your organization is important. When I was a DSP, I only knew the experience of a DSP in my organization, right? When I was a supervisor, I only knew the experience of a supervisor in my organization. And collecting data and collecting opinions of those in your workforce will really help you give a understanding of the organization from a bigger perspective and from everyone's perspectives, or as many people as you can collect perspectives. So that's really important to do as well. And also knowing that not all strategies are going to work for all organizations. Some strategies you might not want to use because of the size of your organization. Maybe you're too small or too big for a certain strategy. Some strategies might not work because of your location. We know that there are big differences between being a provider in a rural area and being a provider in a city or a suburban area, right? Those are very big differences, and it's important to think about those things as you're looking to implement workforce strategies. In addition, your organizational culture. some ways that your organization does things might just not jive with the way that a certain strategy is supposed to work. So you may have to either change that workforce culture and look into that workforce culture and start thinking about that, or try a different strategy. So all of these things can be found out by collecting data. So data is super useful to really inform how to continue to retain, hire, select, and train staff at your organization. And then when we're talking about comparing data, you'll see the slide a little bit later. So I'm just going to briefly give you this overview, but we are going to go through data from all three of these organizations. So I just want to provide you with this information early on. The Institute on Community Integration, where Danielle and I work, has a ton of data that you can check out. Most of it for free online, state level surveys, that COVID-19 survey I was talking about, and then secondary analyses. And it can really give you an idea of the best practices for workforce strategies. The National Core Indicators has that State of the Workforce Survey, which was formerly called the Staff Stability Survey. And that can give you a good idea of workforce as a whole across the country. Minnesota is not an NCI state, but that doesn't mean that you can't pull numbers from there and really understand the state of the workforce and know that you're not alone and that other people's data is, high as well. So a really good thing to look at to not only see the state of the workforce, but also compare your data to what it looks like nationwide. And just so you know, the most recent data for the State of the Workforce Survey right now is from 2020. The report was published in 2022. So when we see those slides, those are from 2020 data. I believe they're coming out with 2021 soon. And then finally, there's PHI. And PHI looks at the workforce as a whole using the Bureau of Labor Statistics data and the American Community Survey data. And a lot of you on this call might know that DSPs do not have their own occupational code on there. So they put together a bunch of different roles. So it's the workforce as a whole in a lot of different areas rather than just DSPs. But it is still a really good site to look at to see state of workforce from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the American Community Survey data. And then they do a lot of state level studies as well. So they're doing a lot of work in a lot of different states across the country. That's really important work and is important to look at, again, much like our work, to see best practices across the country and emerging trends across the country for workforce. So when you're thinking about the data that you can collect at your organization, one of the sets of data you can collect are those numbers or that quantitative data. So those include the wages and status of your workforce, the health insurance of your workforce, and the utilization of the benefits that you offer, the overtime in your workforce, and vacancy rate, so the open positions you have in your organization, the tenure of the staff that you have, and then the turnover rates of the staff that you have at your organization. And we're going to go through all of those right now. So as we're talking about each of these, the data that you're going to see on your screen is from the National Core Indicators. And in 2020, they had 3,600 organizations submit data across the country, and that meant that it was over 286,000 DSPs. So just so you know who is taking this, and it's like, I think about half of the states across the country. So across the country, when they're looking at the status of DSPs, 34% are part-time and 66% are full-time. And that's an important number for you to know at your organization, is then you can kind of start to use that to inform what kind of availability folks might have, what kind of benefits they might have. Full-time and part-time staff look very different. So really seeing that and seeing the needs of each of those groups is really important. In addition, tracking your wages is really important. We know across the country that wages are low for DSPs. Across the country, the starting average wage is $11.56, and the overall average, so not just the starting wage, but the overall average is $12.36. So this shows us this less than $1 difference between a starting DSP and then just an average DSP who's been in the field for a while. there's a little bit of wage compression, which means that you don't get a lot of raises as a DSP throughout your time and your tenure. So this is a good thing to look up and to look at your organization to see if you are experiencing wage compression and to see if there's anything that you can do about that, because we know that those long-term DSPs who have been around a while really have those knowledge, skills, and abilities, and they're really excellent at supporting DSPs or supporting people. So it's really important to try to keep them, and one of those retention techniques is a higher wage. So that's just one of the things that you can do to track your average wages. And then health insurance and benefits utilization. Across the country, 57% of providers offered health insurance to some or all DSPs, and 62% offered it to only full-time DSPs. 43% do not offer health insurance. So this in your organization would just look like a yes or no data point on whether you offer it, but then you can dig deeper and see how many people are taking advantage of your health insurance and your other benefits. We had an organization that we were working with in another state who did this and who looked at their benefits utilization, and they found that the more traditional benefits that you see, like health insurance, retirement accounts, things like that, weren't being taken advantage of at their organization. So they dug a little bit deeper and they asked their staff, why, what would they prefer? And they found that their staff wanted pet insurance as a benefit. And that was something that they really, really wanted. They didn't want to engage in health insurance because I think most of their staff were still under their parents' health insurance because they had a younger group of DSPs, but they wanted that pet insurance. So this organization started this pet insurance benefit, and they will continue to track it and see how much it's being utilized and see if it's worth it, right? If it's worth it to them monetarily, because you don't want to just implement a strategy and let it go forever and be paying for it if it's not doing anything. Or if maybe they need to reassess it and see why people aren't taking advantage of that benefit when they maybe just told the organization that they did want that benefit. So important to not only track if you're offering benefits, but also how much they're being used so that you can assess on a regular basis if those benefits are worth offering. Some other numbers to consider are your vacancy rates and tenure of your staff. Across the country, part-time vacancy is 11% and full-time is 9%. Breaking vacancy rates down by part-time and full-time or by some other factor at your organization that's important might tell you a lot about your organization, right? If you have a 25% part-time vacancy rate and a 2% full-time vacancy rate, maybe it's time to shift some things or look into why those vacancy rates are the way that they are. Or maybe you have a program specific vacancy rate that's much higher than the others. That might be worth exploring as well. In addition, it's important to see the tenure of the people at your organization. People with different tenure are going to have different needs. I've been at ICI for 2.5 years now, and my needs as an employee are very different from when I started. When I first started, I needed a lot more support and handholding and understanding of the organizational culture at ICI. Now that I'm here a little bit longer, I'm looking more at professional development and how can I continue to grow and grow in my career. So different needs at different points in my career. If you have a big representation of older staff or higher tenured staff, like nationally, 66% of staff had been employed over 12 months, you're going to have different needs and a different organizational culture than one that has lower tenured staff overall. And if you have never calculated your vacancy rate before, on your screen is the equation for vacancy rates. And Danielle is going to be sending out the recording along with these slides. So if you don't write this down, that's okay. You will have access to this later. But if you want to look at your vacancy rate, it's the number of vacant DSP positions divided by the number of DSPs employed plus the vacant DSP positions. And then you multiply that by 100 to get a percent. And then you can compare that to national core indicator national numbers. You can compare that to your previous years, things like that. After vacancy rate, another really important number to look at is your turnover rate. We already looked at this slide, but really zooming into your turnover rate and seeing what that is and tracking it over a period of time is really going to tell you what's going on at your organization and how you can continue to support and improve your workforce. Again, much like vacancy rate, breaking down these turnover numbers are really going to tell you a lot. That NCI specifically breaks it down by those who had been employed fewer than 6 months, those who had been employed between 6 and 12 months, those who had been employed 12 to 24 months, and those who had been employed 2 years or longer. So if you're looking at those who had been employed fewer than 6 months, typically, and not always, but typically, if you have a lot of people leaving at that point, that means there's a mismatch between the employee and the job. So maybe the employee thought the job was going to be something different and they had different expectations, and then it was not the same job, so they want to leave. Maybe the employee who is selected doesn't have the right skills or propensity to earn the skills, to develop the skills, and leaves or is no longer at your organization. If you have a really high turnover rate for those who had been employed for like 6 to 12 or 12 to 24 months, that might be that initial training. Maybe they're not getting that initial training that they need to do their job, and they're feeling unsupported or not confident in their job because they haven't developed those skills. And then when you're looking at those who had been employed 24 months or longer, typically that's about professional development and continued support and training and recognition. So there are a lot of factors there, but when you've been at a job a long time, you have different needs than those who have been at a job a shorter time. And again, while I'm saying these things of this is what the less than 6 months means, that is not always the case. It is important to dig into why a little bit more, but this is a good place to start, gathering this turnover data and really breaking it down and seeing where your numbers are really high, and then digging into those people and finding out why they're leaving is really important. Another thing that you can do with turnover is, again, break it down by program or department. One of the organizations that we were supporting a couple of years ago had a pretty low turnover rate, but we asked them to break down their turnover rate by house, and they found out that one of their houses had a lot of staff who had been there for a really, really long time and who enjoyed getting overtime. So when new staff came in, they weren't the friendliest to those staff because the overtime was really important for those longtime staff to be able to continue to live the lifestyle that they wanted to live and to continue to pay their bills. And that was an issue. So they had to work through with that house and those staff and work on teamwork and work on inviting new staff in and finding new opportunities for those long-term staff to earn money in other ways. So as you're looking at your turnover, there are a lot of opportunities to break that down and to really see where your turnover is highest and lowest. If you've never calculated your turnover before, there are a couple of ways to do it, but we at the ICI do a crude separation rate, which means that we include vacant positions as part of our turnover rate. So that means that the equation that we recommend you use is number of DSPs who left your organization over a number of DSPs employed plus vacant positions. And then you multiply that by 100 to get a percent. Again, you will have these slides, so if you need this equation later, you will have it to reference. And then if you want to break it down a little bit, this is an example of early turnover. So if you wanted to get the turnover of DSPs who leave within their first 6 months of employment, you do number of DSPs who left and were employed less than 6 months divided by total number of DSPs who left, and you multiply that by 100. If you were looking at a more specific, like program specific or DSPs who leave after 2 years or something like that, you would change that top number to whatever you wanted to focus on specifically. And if that doesn't make sense, please ask a question or put something in chat, and we can come back to this later and readdress this. So like I've been hinting at, numbers don't tell the whole story. Numbers are a good place to start. They begin to tell you what's going on with the workforce and allow you to really compare your numbers nationally and compare your numbers to your history at your organization. But they don't tell you the why, and they don't necessarily tell you exactly what you need to improve those numbers, right? That is where you need more of that qualitative data. So many of you probably already use a lot of these, and we saw in your poll earlier that I think almost half of you already do use opinions or attitudes data. But some of the things that you can do to really learn about your workforce and what they want are listed on your screen now. And they include exit interviews or surveys, which we've been hearing a lot are more difficult to gather now. Because employees don't tend to respond or tend to leave, no show, no call, or it just is much more complicated to get exit interviews and surveys in the hands of the people who are leaving. So an alternative to that is a stay survey, where you are surveying or interviewing employees who are still there and asking them why they're there and what might be reasons that they might leave in the future. And again, there are many ways to do this. Surveys are really nice because they're anonymous. Also, bringing somebody from the outside to run focus groups or interviews is good as well. Some people might not feel as comfortable being transparent in an interview with a staff person, though maybe you've created the culture, an organizational culture of change where they do feel comfortable coming to you and telling you what's going on. So it just depends, again, on your organizational culture on what you might want to use. Other ways you can gather data is through a new staff survey. So really talking with new staff or surveying new staff about their experiences and what they liked and what they would like changed. An organizational commitment survey, a staff satisfaction survey. If you are like that organization that found that one of their houses had a higher turnover rate, maybe a teamwork assessment is something that would be really useful for you to see if how teams are functioning and how they're doing. And that's something that the team can take themselves and really evaluate themselves and them as a group, which opens the opportunity for discussion. And then finally, personality or style inventories, like the Myers-Briggs and ones like that. They're not all research-based, but they do create a really good start to start those conversations around why people respond the way that they respond, why people work the way that they work, and really, really understand each other as a team. And then there are performance or training standards data. So that includes job description reviews, competency assessments, inventory of employee skills. So really looking at what skills employees have and what skills they need to do the job, and figuring out how to get that gap smaller. There's also performance reviews, which I'm sure a lot of you do, typically annually, biannually, quarterly, depending on your organization. But if you're using those as a form of data collection, right, it's a form of employee development and a form of growth and a form of assessing where someone is at, but it's also something that you as HR or a leader in your organization can look at and see the trends across your organization and see if there are common trends that you can support DSPs in, or common trends of training needs that they need that you're noticing across performance reviews. There's also training needs assessments that you can do to see what training DSPs or even supervisors might need. And then a job analysis assessment. So really looking at what the job looks like at your organization or in your department or in your program. And then moving on to cost or benefits data. There's a lot of different things you can do there that sometimes are a little bit more technical, but can be really worth it. For example, a wage or benefit market analysis. So looking at what kind of wages and benefits other organizations are offering, maybe other provider organizations, maybe organizations that offer similar wages to you. So you can start thinking about things that way, and how the for-profit world is handling benefits versus how the nonprofit world is handling benefits. There's a lot of things you can look into in that area, and looking at emerging trends and looking at best practices in wages and benefits. And then really studying the effectiveness of your bonuses and your monetary incentives, right? We did this with an organization a few years ago who was offering hiring bonuses. That was a big trend and continues to be, but a huge trend, I think, about a year ago, where everybody was offering it. Arby's was offering it, McDonald's was offering it, everyone was offering it. And they found through their analysis that folks who were getting the hiring bonus tended to leave right after they got the bonus. So they still offered the bonus, but they spread it out over the course of a certain amount of time. So the employee got it when they were done with their initial training, and then they got another chunk of it when they were done, when they were 6 months into the job, and they got another chunk of it when they were a year into the job. And then they expanded that to their employee recruitment bonuses as well, or employee referral bonuses as well, so that the employees who were referring other employees were supporting those people to stay around longer as well. And again, that won't work at every organization. That's just an example of how that analysis and how that data collection really impacted the way that they were doing things at that specific organization. And I'm seeing a question in the chat. Yes, we are going to send you a PDF of these slides, and we'll also send a recording of this as well. And then another thing that you can look at are a cost-benefit analysis of your recruitment sources. I know everybody is trying different things to recruit. There are some pretty new ideas coming out across the country in how to recruit people. And some of them are really original and new and emerging, and we don't know if they work. So it's really important to see if those recruitment sources are working. We've been hearing a lot recently that job fairs aren't working as well as they used to. So thinking about if that time and effort is worth it. And when you're thinking about recruitment sources, it's also about getting your name out there, right? So maybe you don't recruit anybody, but you talk to, I don't know, 100 people. And maybe that's worth it to you as an organization to get your name out there. It's really dependent on what your goal is of the recruitment task that you're doing. But either way, looking at those recruitment sources and seeing what's working. Maybe Indeed is working really well for you, so maybe you want to start paying to see if that continues to give you more employees. Maybe you paid for Facebook advertising for a few months and that didn't work at all. It's important to reassess that and look at what you advertised, see if you want to change that advertising and try again, just changing that a little bit, or just stop it completely. But really tracking these things to see if things are worth it, so that your money is going somewhere and it's doing the most work for you. Again, it's really important to compare your data, whether it be to those NCI numbers that I just showed you, where again, the most recent is 2020, or whether it be to PHI numbers, or even like you're looking to start a survey or something like that. You can get really good ideas from either ICI or PHI or the millions of other resources out there, just to start to really inform your data collection and data analysis process. Okay, so I gave you a pretty big list of different ways that you can gather data and different resources you can gather data from. It was it was not at all exhaustive, but it gave you a good idea of some of the places that you can start gathering data. And now we're going to move on to talking about how you can use that data. And yes, this all of these are publicly available. You don't have to pay for any of this. The staff The State of the Workforce Survey, you can get on their mailing list and they'll send out when the next one is available. Same thing with PHI, they have a really solid mailing list that sends you their most recent reports. And then we at ICI offer a bunch of stuff for free on our website as well. And we have a newsletter as well that you can sign up for. So yes, these are all publicly available. So as we're talking about how you use your data, we don't want it to just sit there, we want it to be used. We're going to launch a poll to see how you are using your data, because we know from the last poll that we did that a lot of you are collecting that data. So how are you using that data now? Danielle, you can go ahead and launch it. Maybe you collect it on a regular basis. So you discuss it as a team. Maybe you compare them to some of those national numbers or other national numbers that you know of. Maybe you use it to inform your workforce solutions and how you implement strategies. Maybe use it to make sure that the strategies that you've implemented in the past are effective. And maybe you don't know how you use it because you're not a part of those conversations, or maybe you do not collect workforce data. And we'll give you a minute or so here. And again, it's a select all, so I believe. We have about 70% of you responding. We'll give it about 15 seconds. Okay, Danielle, can you end the poll and share? So quite a few of you discuss it on a regular basis. That's great. Something to consider is who you discuss it with. I don't know how regularly data was collected at the organization that I was a DSP at, because I was a DSP, right? So it's important to include folks at all levels of your organization, not only because it helps them feel like a part of the organization, but that is a retention tactic, is to give folks leadership skills and folks leadership abilities and folks to understand what's going on at their own organization that they're working at. So that's just another consideration to make when you're talking about discussing workforce data on a regular basis. About half of you use it to implement workforce strategies. That's great. So this might be a review for some of you, which amazing. I'm so glad that you do that. And then 34% of you use it to find out if strategies work. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but we won't go too deep into that. But it's really important to evaluate the strategies to make sure that they're working and you're not wasting your money, your time, your resources, which are already very limited, to do things that aren't working. And about a quarter of you don't know how you use workforce data. I encourage you to ask folks at your organization how you're using it, and to ask leaders and to ask other folks how you're using that, especially because so many of you collect it. Important to see how it's being used. And then some of you say you just don't collect workforce data to begin with, which again is okay. That's why you're here, right? All right, Danielle, we can stop sharing that one. So data should always be an ongoing process, really having that baseline data, so that start of the data to really tell you where we're at currently, and then continuing to monitor that throughout the time that you are an organization and you employ workforce, right? Even the most perfect organization has room to grow and has changes that they can make. And your workforce is always going to be changing. We've been hearing a lot that the younger generations look at work very differently than the older generations. So the workforce, again, is changing, and we're seeing different desires of the workforce, different ways that they're working, and different training desires that they have and different benefits that they want. So continuing to monitor these things as your workforce changes is super important. And continue to monitor these things as your strategies are changing is also very important. So just this continued monitoring process is really, really important. That being said, again, we know you all have limited time and limited resources. A lot of these numbers can be just collected annually or twice a year, right? You don't need to have a staff stability survey every month. You can have one like once a year, maybe even once every other year, to give you time to implement what you heard in that staff, did I say staff stability survey? Staff satisfaction survey, to learn from those, give you time to implement what you heard, and then ask again if things are different. And then continuing to just track those things on a regular basis, whether that be annually, twice a year, same thing with your retention numbers and things like that. Okay, so when we're talking about data and we're talking about those workforce strategies, right, there's an 8-step process that we've put together at ICI, which is nothing new. You all have probably seen something like this before, but it's based in implementation science, which is a long-running set of science and research. So we worked it off of that. But the first step is to identify and assess the problem. And that's really where you start with that baseline, those baseline numbers, right? So starting to identify and assess the problem, and really digging into what's going on at your organization, what's going on in your state, so in Minnesota, what's going on nationally, really understanding the problem as a whole. And then step 2 is to really pick that intervention strategy that's going to give you the most bang for your buck, or it's going to be the most effective strategy with where you're at in your organization. And then the next step is to identify components of the strategy. So maybe you are looking to develop a mentoring program, thinking about what that would actually look like and what those steps are to actually have a mentoring program at your organization. And that's another point in which you can use data, but it's going to look a little different, where you'll search sites like, ICI's site, or like PHI's site, or even like some of those like Forbes or other business type sites, to see what best practices are right now and see what's working for the strategy that you want to implement right now, to help inform what might work at your organization. And then, of course, identifying your barriers to implementing those programs, whatever that strategy might be that you choose. There are going to be barriers, and those barriers could look like time, resources, money. Those barriers could look like people struggle with change. Everywhere people struggle with change, no matter how much you think that your organization embraces change, change is hard on everybody. So that might be a barrier to implementation. And then on the flip side, identifying that support for the strategy. So who are the people, the resources, the time, the money that supports the strategy that you're doing. So in the example of a mentoring program, maybe there are some DSPs who are informally mentoring people, and you'd like them to step into a role of mentor, and they would like to step into a role of mentor. They are support for that specific strategy, and they're probably also going to talk pretty highly about it and advertise that to other members in your organization. And then another spot where you need data is to set those goals, measure progress, and establish a time frame. And this is all going to depend on the strategy you choose, right? If you're implementing a mentoring program, it's going to take a while for you to fully have that mentoring program going. So it's going to take a while for you to find out if it's truly effective at meeting whatever you want it to meet. And it's going to take a while to collect that data and to collect maybe satisfaction from mentors and mentees who are in the program, or retention numbers, or whatever you're looking to improve from implementing that strategy. And then step 7 is to obviously implement the strategy. So do it, put it out in the world and do it. And then step 8 is, again, another point where we need data to evaluate that and to really see if it's working. And if it's not necessarily just getting rid of it, but reassessing and seeing if you can change it to make it better suit your organization. Because sometimes we try a strategy and we think, oh, that just didn't work, let's just end it. That might not have been the problem. It's worth exploring and seeing what the problem is and using those satisfaction surveys and things like that to see what employees like and what employees don't like. These are some of the workforce strategies that we've found that are effective at improving the workforce in organizations. And again, these might not apply to you, they might not be effective at your organization, but these are places to start. So if you have high vacancy rates, maybe you want to look at your marketing and recruitment strategies and maybe implement a public service announcement or PSA. Maybe you want to do some targeted marketing. Maybe you want to look into your bonuses and see if you can start implementing some bonuses. Maybe you want to look into where you are recruiting and if there are other sources you can recruit from. And maybe you want to look at developing some kind of pathway in your organization. In selection and hiring, so maybe you would want to focus on this if your turnover data in the employees who have been employed less than 6 months is pretty high. You might want to look into exploring selection and hiring processes. So that might be implementing structural behavioral interviews to really understand a person's skills and attitudes in the job of DSP as you are interviewing them. Maybe a realistic job preview to make sure that a person understands the position that they're about to accept. Or maybe competency-based job descriptions, changing up your job description to better match the job. Structured observation or shadowing, looking at your orientation and onboarding program, and looking at if you're engaging self-advocates and families in the interview process, right? That can often change who you select because families and self-advocates know what they need best. And then finally, maybe you need some cognitive ability tests. Training and professional development. So those are if your retention data is high after 6 months, or if you're hearing from your staff that they don't feel prepared to do the job, or you're hearing from the people you're supporting that they're not getting the supports that they need and that the training isn't sufficient. Maybe you want to look at competency-based training or employee development or credentialing and career pathways, or job analysis of role and demonstration of skills. And this is the area that we're really going to focus on in sessions 2 and 3. Because the best recruitment strategy is a good retention strategy. If you have good retention, you need less people to recruit. And if you have good retention, the people who come in are going to be more excited about working. And if you have good retention, then those people who you're retaining are going to be the people who go out and talk about how great your organization is. And then finally, engagement and retention. So if your retention data is, or if your turnover data is high for folks after 6 months again, or after a year, maybe recognition programs are something to look into, or coaching and mentoring, performance coaching, or building a network within your organization of DSPs, organizational participation, professional DSP roles, wage and benefit and policy change. So really thinking about how you can advocate and how you can support people to advocate for wage and benefit change across the state and across the country. And then supervision. Supervision is a big retention factor. Frontline supervisors have high turnover and DSPs have high turnover. And part of the reason that frontline supervisors have such high turnover is because often, not always, but often good DSPs are promoted to supervisors without getting the skills of a supervisor. So really being intentional about building that those supervision skills and making sure you have enough supervisors for the amount of DSPs that you have. Also competency-based performance reviews, workforce focused organizational culture. We found that in a lot of our work, a lot of organizations don't include DSPs in their mission, vision, and values. And DSPs are just as essential to your organization as the people you're supporting. So it's important to include DSPs as part of your mission, vision, and values, because without them, you don't have an organization. And then again, that policy advocacy, and not only as an organization advocating for change that impacts your workforce and supports your workforce, but also supporting and teaching others to do the same. Now, I just threw a lot at you. This is a lot of workforce strategies. There's a ton of ways you could go with this, but we do know that it's good to start with a single strategy. And it can be really hard to do that. But when you're implementing a lot of things, you're never going to know what one thing is working, right? It's going to be really hard to tell what's working and what's not. Your resources are going to be stretched really thin, and you're going to be throwing a lot of change at once to a lot of people. So it's really important to be selective about your workforce strategies, knowing that you have time and you can do some of these slowly and some of these quickly, right? When we're looking back at it, a recognition program might be a pretty quick thing that you can implement. So that might be something that you plan and implement and start evaluating while you're building something bigger, like an overhaul of your training program or an overhaul of your supervision program or something like that. So it's okay to have those things kind of going simultaneously, but not too much overlap and implementation at the same time, because that's going to be really overwhelming to people. That's going to really stretch your resources, and you're not going to know what's effective and what's not. So this is just one example of how you can use some of what you learned today to start to inform your next steps. So maybe you've done all your data collection. You are one of those people who selected all of the things that you, all of the data that you collect, and you selected from the list that I gave, that you have conversations regularly, you do all of the things with your data, and you find out through your turnover numbers that you have high turnover. And you dig into that a little bit more, and you find out from DSPs and from supervisors and from people you're supporting that people aren't performing well, and that people aren't doing the job well and supporting people well. And you find out that's because of lack of training. Maybe you find this out through surveys, maybe you find this out through conversations that you're having, maybe you have a big meeting and you're able to gather that data from the people in the meeting. Some of the strategies that you can consider are on here, and that includes competency-based training, employee development, recognition programs, coaching and mentoring, employee engagement and organizational participation, and professional development. And those are just some of them. And so at this point, right, you know, data shows these are some of the strategies you can consider. Now you dig in and see what makes the most sense for your organization. Which one is the one that's probably gonna fix it for as little effort as possible. And I say that in knowing that sometimes training programs just need to be overhauled, and that's going to be a lot of work, and that's okay. But again, getting the most bang for your buck. So putting in the resources that you need to be able to implement the proper strategy for your organization. So I threw a lot of things at you all at once, but we do have a worksheet that Danielle's going to put in the chat to help guide you through your next steps, because we don't want these to just be a quick webinar where you take maybe a couple things away and you don't really do anything with it. We want you to be able to do something with what you've learned. So in just a minute, Danielle, if you have that available, can you put it in the chat? If not, I can grab it really quick and put it in the chat as well.
I got it. It'll just take me a moment.
Okay.
Megan, I'll pop
Great.
it in there.
Awesome. Thank you. I know you were answering questions too, so I appreciate it. But there's a worksheet that will let you go through what you're currently doing at your organization and really reflect on, in the area of data collection and assessing what you're doing, where can you grow as an organization? And then as you're reflecting on that, think about the presentation today and what one key takeaway is that you can apply to your organization. And if there are any ideas you want to look more into, or if you need better and additional information to better understand what you learned today, and how you can apply it and where you would get that information from. And then after you do all of these things, on the second page, I believe, there's some guidance to put together a plan as to how that would look at your organization. And this might be something that you take with you and you talk about with your organization, and you work together with your organization to really understand where you can improve in the area of data collection. Because like I said, even the most perfect organization is going to have areas where you can improve. That being said, I see we have about 18 minutes left. We can go back to the worksheet if we have time, but I'd like to open up to questions. Oops. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat, or you can put them in the Q&A. I did see earlier, someone sent just to me, so you won't see it in your chat, that the DSP 6-month follow-up survey for Minnesota reveals that the average hourly wage for workers is $15.28, which is higher than that national average. We did do some work on that, and there are a lot of factors there. We had in the responses, we had a lot of longer term DSPs answer the question, and longer term DSPs typically are paid more. So we thought maybe that was a reason that those numbers are higher, because nationally that COVID survey had a really high wage. There were also in that survey, there were some frontline supervisors who are paid more than DSPs. So there were a few factors, and I can't remember all of them. Those are just the ones off the top of my head, but they are in the report. But yeah, those wages were really high in the COVID survey. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to leave you to put it in the chat and to ask questions as you want. But I do want to say, Danielle earlier said this is part of a 3-part training series. So we have another one February 24th at 10 a.m. about training new and existing staff to improve retention. And then we have another one March 23rd about credentialing programs, because we know credentialing programs are a hot topic in Minnesota and across the United States. So I want to give you some best practices and some ways to think about credentialing if you're considering that as an option in your organization. And with the training, the general training webinar in February, we'll focus more on training programs as a whole, some resources that you have in Minnesota at your disposal, and some other training things as well. I have a question here that says, do you think the wage factor is really important to discuss with your boss? I'm assuming this is a DSP or a non-leader in your organization asking if that's important for DSPs to discuss. I mean, I think any issue that you have at your organization is worth discussing with leaders at your organization, because they don't know it's an issue until you say something. And as we talked about, data is really important. So any conversations that you're having with the leader in your organization, hopefully is tracking that data and tracking wage issues. There's not always the possibility of organizations increasing wages, but there is advocacy that they can do to increase the possibility for those wages, and advocacy you can do to increase your wages. Daycare cost is a critical issue for retention. Yes, it is. It's so high. And it is something that organizations are looking into and states are looking into, discounted and sometimes even free daycare for their employees' children. But it's definitely not a national thing yet. Danielle, I saw you laughing. Danielle has young children, so I'm sure she feels what you're saying. All right, well, if there are no questions, Thank you for coming. And I'll stay on for a few minutes as you all are leaving in case any questions do come up. Otherwise, we hope to see you in February and in March. Thank you all.